It's going to be serious, isn't it?
Yes. I feel a bit of a lemon, but yes.
How did you get involved in medicine?
Good question. Well, when I was at school, I always liked science. I was going to be an engineer, but just before I put my application to university, in fact, just after I put my application in, I actually asked for it back from the school headmaster to change my mind and do medicine, because I thought I could always do medicine. You do science as part of medical training, and then that way you have a choice. Whereas if you do science, it's more difficult to change into medicine later. So it was very much a spur of the moment decision when I was 17.
No other thoughts? Was it always going to be medicine?
I had other thoughts, but from that age on, I really enjoyed the course, and I enjoyed my colleagues, and had a great time. So no serious second thoughts.
Excuse me. And where did it take you?
Yeah, well, I trained in the UK, and when I finished my training, I wanted to go and work somewhere different, and I was offered a job in New Zealand, in Christchurch. So I told my wife I had a job slightly further south than where we were living in Cambridge, and she thought I meant Kent, but it was a little bit further away.
She a Pom, was she?
Yes. So she was a bit surprised. Her mother wasn't pleased.
No. Did it smash any ideas about the colonies with her, or not?
No, I think she was always keen to travel, but just didn't expect to do it quite so soon. And we had a fantastic time there. And I was doing, when you're a young doctor, you get sent to 3-month terms. And one of the terms I was sent to was the cancer ward there. And I really enjoyed the cancer treatment. It was just at a time when testicular cancer was first being treated successfully with chemotherapy. So it was New Zealand's Centre for Testicular Tumours. And all these young men who otherwise would have died were suddenly being saved by these new drugs. And it was a really exciting time, and from then on I just stayed in the field.
Is it true that sort of cancer came via chimney sweeps?
That was different. That was cancer of the...
Could you repeat the chimney sweep thing?
Yeah, sorry.
I don't want to hear my voice.
No, sorry. No, it's cancer of the testes is from the inside, whereas there is a cancer called Pott's cancer, named after the chap who described it in pre-Victorian chimney sweeps. They got so much soot in their scrotum from spending all their lives in chimneys that they got cancer of the scrotum. But that was a different one, similar to the ones you get from irritation of the skin from sunlight or chemical exposure.
Okay, so you ended up in cancer by accident.
More or less, yes. I was going to do general medicine, but I just thought cancer. There was just at a time when the treatments were starting to become really successful. And so it was nice to have that option of patients who were being cured, or at least significantly helped by the treatments you could offer them. And in those days we did both chemotherapy and radiotherapy, so you didn't have to make a choice between the two.
Wow, okay, there's a bit to unpack there for me. You now have to make a choice. You don't do both?
Not normally, not anymore. I'm doing the UK, but here we follow the American system, where there's more of a divide between radiation oncology and medical oncology.
Have to explain that to me. A lot of people disagree, or which is better, or...
Well, naturally, I think radiation is better. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. But to be fair, the situation in medical oncology has changed enormously in the last few years with development of new drugs, immunotherapy, targeted therapies. There's a lot more options now in medical oncology than there were 10 or 15 years ago. But radiation still has that great sort of mixture of high technology and patient care, which is very hard to beat.
At its pure science fiction level, it's a ray gun, right?
It is like a ray gun, yes. It's basically high energy X-rays, which, unlike the ones that you see in a CT scan or just X-ray, penetrate the body much more effectively, so you get a much better dose in the centre of the body where most of the cancers are. And we can control that much more accurately than we used to be able to.
Okay. How's it work?
Good question. So basically what happens, the X-rays damage the DNA in the cells, either directly or by ionising the water molecules close to the DNA, and that leads to breakage in the strands of the DNA, or linkages which shouldn't occur between the different strands. Now, that affects both normal and cancer cells, But our bodies are very good at repairing radiation damage. So the normal cells can repair almost all the radiation damage, where the cancer cells, because their DNA is not quite so well maintained, don't repair it as well. So by spreading out the treatments, you can get a differential effect between the cancer cells and the normal cells in the body. So that's why traditionally we've given treatment over 5 or 6 weeks, because that allows the normal tissue to recover better than the cancer cells do.
How old is what we're using today?
Mm-hmm.
How old has that system, how long has it been around? I also wanted to try and get to your thoughts about, obviously you're excited 40 years ago, 50 years ago with breakthroughs and all that, but they're nothing compared to what is happening now. But what was exciting then? I mean, so you've got to take us on a journey back to what it was like before, because no kid's going to remember that. Because
No,
I even
that's
talked to
true.
Lauren Brown,
Yes.
and she's like 30.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, how old? Oh, as long as I've been around, that's really old technology.
Yes.
And I said, well, you talk to anybody else, they say it's bloody new technology, it's only a decade old.
Yes.
And so it's about how far do you think you've come in this. So if you go from Hippocrates to today,
Yes.
but also cancer and well, radiology and X-rays. That's really post World War II. That's come into its, or post World War One probably, come to its own. But if you could,
Yeah, to talk a bit about that.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
sure.
explain a bit. But and with effervescence,
Trying to look a
and
bit more,
love.
yes, a bit more energy. Yes, okay. I take the point. I tend to be a bit flat.
It's me. I just do it to everyone. Look at Steve. He's asleep.
Yes, he is actually nearly. No, that's true. No, it's been an amazing journey over the last hundred and something years. As you probably know, X-rays and radioactivity were both discovered about the same time in the late 1890s. And were used for cancer treatment remarkably early. So by the early 1900s, as well as diagnostic radiology, there was the use of both radioactive isotopes and X-rays for cancer treatment. The problem, of course, was that people didn't know why they worked or how they worked. So they basically turned the machine on for a while and turned it off when the skin got too red, which was fine in the short term because people recovered really well. But then over a period of time, over years later, terrible late side effects occurred both to the patient and also to the people operating the machine, because they often used their fingers that got them in the way while they were positioning the patient. So many of them got cancers on their hands, lost their fingers or hands, and subsequently died of cancer. So it was very dangerous. And then there was a period when people thought it was just too dangerous to use, and then gradually they were able to work out the correct dosing and the correct safety precautions. And so by the 1930s, early 40s, it was being reasonably well used. But the trouble was the X-rays didn't really have the energy you need to get to the middle of the body. So you could treat the body, you could treat cancers, but the skin got a very high dose, and so you got very significant burns on the skin. So if you talk to people my age, their parents would have told them terrible stories of radiotherapy, hideous burns that took weeks or months to heal. But the real breakthrough came just after the Second World War, when very high energy X-rays started to be used, and they have a property whereby the skin dose is actually lower than the dose in parts deeper in.
Just so
Do it again, yes. So they have the high energy X-rays have an interesting property where the dose on the skin and for the first centimetre or so is actually lower than the dose further in. So you can concentrate the beams on a deep-seated tumour, and the dose on the skin is relatively mild. And so you do get skin reactions, but they're much less severe and they heal well. So that was really the breakthrough. What we call mega voltage energies, where very high energy X-rays have this different properties from lower energy X-rays or kilovoltage X-rays as we would use in CT scans or chest X-ray machines. So that enabled us then to start really treating tumours successfully.
Is that a point of focus thing? Are you focusing beyond the skin?
It's more.
Excuse me.
It's more what we call the build-up effect, that because of the way the X-rays interact with matter, they don't give a full dose on the skin. It's not really focused, it's just with depth. The dose builds up in the first centimetre and a half of the skin, underneath the skin, and then as it drops off through the body, you get a lower dose. So what you have to do is you have to aim at the tumour from several different directions. And with high energy X-rays, you can do that quite effectively. So we used to treat patients from the front and back and then from the sides. And now we treat them by going around the whole body to spread out that dose that you don't want on the skin while still giving the high dose on the cancer itself. Now, to do that effectively, you needed to know where the cancer was, and the problem until really the 1970s was that we had no real way of mapping where the cancer was, because on plain x-rays you can't see it very well. It wasn't until the development of CT scans and then MRI scans where we could get good three-dimensional views of the human body, and that enabled us to draw on the scans where we wanted to treat, and also organs we wanted to spare, like the lungs or the bowel. And so you could then calculate the dose in a much more accurate way than you could just doing it by hand. In fact, I remember very much the very first CT scans were just of the brain, and terrible quality when you look back on them, but the difference it made for patient diagnosis was really amazing. So that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. That was an amazing time of progress in medical imaging.
This is a CT, right?
Yes. So we have our own CT scanner now, which we can use to take scans of the patient, both in a normal position, but also if we're treating them in an unusual position, such as, say, with breast cancer, where you treat a patient with their arm out at the side, we can take the scan in that position. So we can draw on the scan, and then the computer can calculate which direction the X-ray beam should come, how much should come from each direction.
God, you just made me think about the excuse me, the doctor who got into surgeon who got into trouble by saying you didn't have to remove the entire breast in like 1964, 65, and all the doctors said you can't just take a bit out of it. So he was almost, well, not disbarred, he was shunned, I think.
Yes, that was a great time for women. It was interesting. It was very culturally determined. So the Americans were great believers in more and more surgery, as you might expect, taking the breast, taking more of the skin, taking the lymph nodes, leaving a very deformed patient, unfortunately, with a very flat chest where you could see the ribs sticking through, very stiff shoulders, loss of muscle to move the arm, the traditional Halsted radical mastectomy. Whereas countries like France, where perhaps women had a higher profile, they were very keen not to lose the breast, and so they, even back in the 1960s, they would try to conserve the breast as much as possible, and that spread to the UK and then to other countries. So even until probably the 80s or 90s, there was quite a divide across the Atlantic between surgeons who were just removing the lump and then offering radiotherapy, as against surgeons who were doing mastectomies much more commonly. Now, some women still need a mastectomy for various reasons, but it's a relatively small proportion now, and we try to avoid it we offer the patient the choice. They can decide whether to. Some people still prefer it because they feel less anxious, the breast is gone, they feel they're safer from the cancer. That's not actually true, but they feel better, and so you have to go with the patient. Sometimes they choose things that we may not choose.
That's not true.
It's not, no, because in most cases, you can get just as good a control of the cancer, perhaps even slightly better, with a small operation and radiotherapy than you can with a mastectomy.
So Angelina Jolie took both of hers off because of the history of breast cancer?
Yes, because she was worried about genetic breast cancers. And that's not an unreasonable thing to do if it really worries you, and that led to a lot of other women wanting the same procedure. But probably not necessary in most cases. But it's always a choice. If something really plays on your mind and you just can't avoid thinking about it all the time, then sometimes you do have to have an operation that may be less necessary for other people who can live with that level of risk. So it's something the patient has to make the decision. We can give them advice and tell them the numbers, but ultimately they and their families have to decide what they're comfortable with.
Of course, there's the physical well-being as well as the mental well-being.
Exactly,
as well.
yes.
Yeah.
No, it's really important. We tend to forget that sometimes. You get obsessed with the technology. You do have to remember that the patient has to be comfortable with their options, both with the numbers in terms of cancer control, but also the likely side effects and the time it takes to have treatment. Now, a lot of times breast cancer patients would avoid radiotherapy because it took 5 or 6 weeks to deliver and they expected terrible side effects. But now we deliver it in 3 weeks or less in most cases, and very minimal side effects again in most cases. So it's a lot less of an undertaking now to have radiotherapy for breast cancer than it was 10 or 20 years ago.
10 or 20, even though 20's a long 2 decades, 1 decade.
Yes.
It's amazing.
See, things can't change too quickly in diseases like breast cancer because cancer itself normally has a long natural history. So you need to be sure that the treatments you're doing don't just have short-term benefits, but they have long-term benefits over many years. There's no point in changing something and then finding that 10 years down the track it actually makes your patients worse. You have to be confident before you make a major change that's going to be a durable change and lead to long-term benefits.
That makes it, you can't rush it like a bullet again.
No. There are some technology things where you can tell easily that they're working quickly, but in terms of the patient response, that takes longer.
So from where's radar figure into all this? Because they sort of go in World War II the radar, and I don't know if it's true or not. Whether people warming themselves at the antennas, somebody says it's a myth. Somebody did say it melted my chocolate, but that's all we know. But how do we get from radar to radiology? Or did we?
Did we? Not really. I mean, only in one sense, that the machines that generate the waves for radar can subsequently be used to generate the microwave that then is used to generate the X-rays. But the actual radar itself doesn't really have much connection with treatment. It's extremely dangerous, in fact, to stand in front of those sort of devices. Even the sort of microwave links that you see for phone towers and things, very dangerous to stand in front of them because your insides can get microwaved the same as your lunch. It's a very bad idea.
That's good to know.
Yes, yes, but please don't stand in front of those big horns on the towers. Don't stand in front of those. So I'm told.
So the radiotherapy. I'm wondering why it's called that. I know, but I've got you to tell me.
Yes, actually, I'm talking myself to be honest. I mean, it's called radiotherapy because it comes from radioactivity and radium, but I don't know where the actual word. I suppose it must be waves. You must have come trying to think how it was actually described first, because I don't actually know who first used the word radiology.
That's why being bemused whether it was radio as we know. No.
Yes, no. No, I mean, radio obviously comes from the same sort of root, in terms of something at a distance or waves, radiate. But I don't actually know. I presume that's where it came from, that it was a form of radiation that people would have, it was like light but different, that it was high energy but also couldn't be seen was the thing about it. That's what made it so difficult at first to work with, was that you couldn't see it, you could only measure its effects. And that was how they first discovered, having some film left in a drawer close to a radioactive source, and seeing that the film was blackened even though light didn't actually get to it. So there was clearly some wave that was something, whether a wave or a particle, that was getting through the material of the desk into the drawer and changing the film.
Outside of the visual spectrum.
Yes. So they are much higher, shorter wavelength and higher energy than visible light.
Excuse me. Which end of the spectrum is it favouring? We go out into infrared at one end and
ultraviolet
at the other.
So it's further beyond the ultraviolet range, but very, very much further in terms of the energy available. So we talk about radiation in two forms. We talk about ionizing radiation, which is basically the X-rays used for diagnosis and treatment, and that's high enough energy to be able to damage the molecules, to ionize the molecules in the tissue. And then non-ionizing radiation, which has many other interesting properties but doesn't actually damage the tissues directly in the same way.
I don't know what's wrong with my throat. Yes, I would love to. Oh, look, there's some here.
Let's just come for a second.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I'll just go usable. I don't want to hear you if you're wrong. I want you to take this.
Better now?
Yeah, you just
Oh,
stop there, though,
No, because I don't know what I'm asking now. You've knocked my throat.
Cut.
No, do not cut.
Do not cut.
I said, yeah, well, where radio comes from, radio, and of course it does come in waves.
Yes.
And I've watched all these videos in the last few days, saying, what am I going to ask you? Because and there's some great German sales pitches about their machines. But it's in my mind, it's almost like, well, we've gotten to MRI, we've gotten to. Is there anywhere else to go? Have we reached the end? Or is there much more in the future? Or
I mean, that's always a hard question. There's always a temptation to think that you have reached the end of technology, not just in medicine, but in everything. And so far, that's actually proven not to be the case. Always somebody comes up with something clever, something new that people haven't thought of before. So MRI, for instance, is really useful, but it's very expensive and it's very slow and very noisy for the patient lying on the bed. And so it's not the ultimate solution. There needs to be a lot more development to make it better. And I don't think that means the end of radiology by any means. CT scan still has a lot to do that MRI doesn't do as well. It's much faster, so you don't get the problem of sort of movement of the patient while they're lying on the scan. You can see different things. And one of the things that people around the world are looking at is trying to improve CT by looking at different energies, because one of the things that normal X-rays do is they have, instead of having a single energy, they have a spectrum of energy. They have a high energy, the maximum energy that the machine can make, and then below that there's a sort of tail off of different energies. And one of the things that we're looking at and others are looking at is trying to make very discrete energies that have you can interact with matter in a much clearer, simpler way. And then by combining the pictures taken with different energies, you can get a lot more information out of your CT scan.
different energies?
So yes,
Expand.
yes. Well, when you make X-rays, they have a maximum energy depending on how they're generated. In a CT scan, they're generated in a very simple way by having an electric potential that accelerates electrons from one side to the other, and they hit a metal target at the end and produce the X-rays. And so the bigger the voltage you have across those two electrodes, the higher the energy of the X-rays that are produced at the end. And so by altering that and by filtering what comes out, you can make very narrow bands of energy that have specific properties that are very useful in the way they interact with the human body and give you much more information on what's going on inside.
When did pictures move into therapy? Or how?
How?
Somebody said, hey, if we just do it a lot more? Or
Yeah. I mean, we've always needed pictures because you have to know what you're aiming at. It's always been a specialty that's very tied to diagnostic radiology. And in fact, in many countries, we belong to the same college. So we share some training with diagnostic radiologists because we need to know what we're hitting. So there's two real, I suppose, focuses in progress in radiation oncology. One is better machines to deliver the radiation, the damage to the cells as accurately as possible. The other is knowing as accurately as possible where the tumour is. And that's where things like MRI and PET scanning have really helped us, because the more accurately we can target things, the better we can do for the patient. We treat less of the tissues we don't need to, but also we don't miss the cancer cells, because one of the issues is that to see a cancer, it needs to reach a certain size. And obviously the smaller you can detect it, the better that is. But you can't detect it if it's tiny. If it's just a few millimetres in size, you can't pick it up with current technology. So I'm confident there's a lot more work to be done. I don't think we've come to the end of technology development by a long way.
And the smaller that you get it, the better for everyone.
Generally, yes, because you can treat a smaller area, you can be more effective in killing the cells, and the patient has less side effects both from the cancer and from the treatment.
What are the virtues of radiotherapy, and what's its? Well, you said, I wouldn't say call them competitors.
Yes,
It's burn it out, basically,
Yes.
isn't it? But
it is. We don't like to talk about things like radiation burns. We talk about radiation reactions, but it does cause some burning. It's not a thermal burn. Sometimes people think it actually makes you hot. That's not how it works. How it works is by damaging the DNA of the cells, so they don't actually get hot. In fact, the energy used compared with the energy to heat a cup of coffee is actually very small, but it's just targeted well into a precise place that causes damage to the cells. So I think the strength of radiotherapy is its targeted nature, that you're not treating the whole body. You're able to determine where the radiation is going to go, and we're getting better and better at giving a high dose where we want it and a lower dose where we don't. The weakness of it is the same thing in a way, that it doesn't treat the whole body. So if some cells have escaped from the area that you're treating, they're not covered by the radiotherapy. And so that's why we most often nowadays use radiotherapy in combination with chemotherapy or some other form of systemic therapy like immunotherapy or targeted therapies, so that we can try to kill the small number of cells with the chemotherapy and then the bigger lump of cells with the radiotherapy.
a few tools to your kit. for the clinician anyway. This is the ultimate X-ray, isn't it? What we're looking at, this one.
I mean, it's not really the ultimate, it's the best we have available at the moment, but I'm sure it's not ultimate. We can find better ways of doing it.
Well picked up. Okay, it's the best we've got in
Yes.
the world.
I mean, these sort of type of CT scanners here are very widespread throughout the world. We are lucky that we're able to purchase these things here in Australia, but they're also available in many other countries around the world. I think one of the things that happens nowadays is that technology is very uniform. It spreads very quickly, not just in medicine, but in everything else. And once someone's invented something, it rapidly goes around the world. People learn quickly what's available, and they want to have the best available for themselves.
So you better describe the difference between this machine and the one we're going to see.
So this is a diagnostic machine. This is a CT scanner, very similar to the ones you'll find in a normal radiology practice. The only difference really of this one is that the bore or the donut in the middle where the patient goes through is a little bit bigger than normal, so that we can get patients in slightly different positions from normal through it. But otherwise it uses the same technology as conventional CT scanners. And that's a great advantage for us because there aren't many of these. There's not many radiotherapy departments, whereas there are hundreds of diagnostic departments. And so the work and the new ideas are really concentrated in diagnostic radiology, and then we can sort of use those to our advantage. We probably wouldn't get them developed just for radiotherapy. So
And that's what we're going to look at in Coogee, isn't it?
yeah, so with the Coogee, with the treatment machines, they use those higher energy X-rays, megavoltage X-rays we talked about before, where they have that special property of not giving such a big dose to the skin, but using a high dose, giving a high dose inside the body. So it's really a completely different technology. The way they're generated is quite different from the way they're generated in a CT scan or a chest X-ray machine.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Expand a bit. I don't want to talk forever, but I could expand a bit on the technology of Coogee, because we're not going to interview around there, are we?
Well, no, we'll do everything here, and then
Yes.
we'll take your voice and overlay it with
Yep.
what you'll show us. So
Yes.
if you want to describe how a patient goes through from start to finish,
Mhm.
then we'll go film
Okay.
it.
Yep.
And
Fair
you
enough.
don't need to be on the screen any longer than...
Good. That's all right. No, 'cause I'm just trying to make it sound more exciting, but it's always hard to do. So I like waving my arms around, but I can't do that because I'm sitting still. That's why it's easier.
It didn't stop Ricky. Ricky was...
In the room. No, it's easier when you're in the machine. You can point to things and and say this is what it is.
Oh, well, maybe
No,
we
that's
can do
hard to
that.
film.
Maybe we can do that. Would that be better, Steve?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to keep you.
Well, why don't we do about... Why don't
I'll
you do a
talk
quick
bit,
one here?
Talk a bit about the
Then
machine 1st
we'll rely upon
Yeah.
that. I wonder if we should put someone through here. But we can't turn the machine back on now, so let's forget about that.
Yeah, there's not much to see, to be honest, because the rotating part is inside that metal
Yeah.
case. So apart from some lights coming on and off, you can't actually see very much. You see,
You're still rolling.
Yes.
Still
Oh.
rolling.
Otherwise, I would have said, cut!
sorry,
Okay.
back to work.
No,
yeah.
no.
So
So-
the
No, I
different
just want to finish that, but
yes.
as we were saying, that's okay.
So
Don't worry
the-
about the camera.
So the things are a little different on the treatment machines because on a CT scanner like this, the patient lies on the bed, usually nice and straight, and the bed just slides them through the donut and takes the pictures as they go through. On a treatment machine like Coogee, the patient lies on a much more open bed where the machine rotates around them in a much more obvious way. And the really important thing first is to get the patient into the correct position. So when they have the planning process, when the radiation therapists start the treatment, they mark up where the patient should lie on the bed, and we have lasers in the walls that act as a sort of positioning device so that you can get the patient into the correct position, roughly the correct position. Then we have two other ways of confirming the correct position. One is the machine will take its own CT scan so that we can look at the internal organs of the patient and make sure they're in the right position with sort of millimetre accuracy, and if it's not correct, we can move the patient slightly to get them in the right position. The other thing that's been a big advance is what we call surface-guided radiotherapy. In the old days, we used to put little tattoos on the patient's skin so that the radiation therapist could reproduce the position. And that was easy enough, but it was painful having them done, and the patients didn't like it because those tattoos were a reminder of their treatment, particularly for breast cancer patients where they're on the front of their chest. They and everybody else could see the tattoos. They're only very small little dots, but it was enough for some more sensitive people to be reminded of their treatment. So now we don't do that anymore. We have a a very clever system which projects a speckled pattern of light onto the patient, and that's then read back by a camera, and can position the patient very accurately, so that we can then make sure that not only is their main part of their body, but their arms or their legs or any other part we're interested in is in the correct position. And if that moves, the machine will turn off, and then the radiation therapist can get them back into the right position before the treatment continues. So that gives us a great way. For instance, in some situations we want the patient to hold their breath during treatment, because we don't want the breast to move, or the lung bits in the lung or the liver, parts that move with respiration, we don't want them to move. And so we can use that device to tell that the patient's holding their breath with the correct degree of depth of their breathing, and when they have to breathe, that machine picks that up straight away and turns the machine off. They take another deep breath and back into the right position, off we go again. So that's been a great help for patient positioning. So now we really can be very accurate in where we aim the radiation beams.
So this is all about targeting.
Yes. Very important to target things accurately, because as you become more more precise, you need to be more accurate in what you're doing, because in the old days when you treated a big area, it didn't matter so much if things moved slightly, because they'd still be within the field. Now we're taking such care to miss some of the normal tissues, we don't want to miss the cancer, so targeting becomes more and more important. And that's where progress in imaging is not going to stop in the foreseeable future. We're going to keep getting better at that.
And this is why you put masks on the head. So
Yes.
it seems cruel. You've got to stamp someone down and put them in a position.
Yes.
Maybe in your own words say it's not ideal, but
That's correct. Yes. So when we're treating some parts of the body, particularly the head and neck region, where accuracy is really important, because you can imagine in the head and neck region there's a lot of really critical structures, the brain itself, the nerves to the eye, the salivary glands, many structures which you need to be very precise about. And so the traditional approach has been to make a mask, a plastic device to hold patients still. And again, for us, that's quite easy. You get a sheet of plastic, which you put into some warm water to make it soft. Then you put it over the patient like a hot tea towel, and as it cools and dries, it sets into a reasonably firm mask which holds them still. And then every day that's put back on their face for treatment. Now that's not too bad for the staff, but for the patient it's not very pleasant, because it's quite claustrophobic having this thing put over your mouth and nose. It also presses on your larynx when you're lying down, and so it's difficult. It feels as if you can't breathe properly sometimes. It's quite an unpleasant feeling. So one of the progress at the moment is trying to get rid of those, or at least reduce the amount of stabilization that you need, and you can do that by using this surface guidance system, so that you just have something light to hold their head in roughly the right position, and then with that pattern of light on the skin you're able to see if they move at all and position them accurately. And also with some machines you can take x-rays continuously during the treatment to see if the bones of the skull are moving at all, and if they move more than a millimetre or so you can turn the machine off and get them back into the right position. So we hope eventually to get rid of those masks in most cases. Probably only a few years away, I hope. With reasonable luck in scientific progress, we should be able to get rid of those relatively soon. But at the moment, it's still the standard of care for most patients.
it's going to help with AI. Is AI helping? Tell us about Paul's experiment with the, not that one.
Not that one, the other one. Now, AI is an enormous potential for diagnostic radiology and for radiotherapy, and indeed for most of life, I think. But particularly for us, because we deal with huge amounts of data. And we often see that in a rather superficial way. We look at a CT scan picture, which is just a black and white image of what's been created by the machine. But the amount of data that the machine's got, the computer inside has stored, is enormous. And it's just too much for humans to be able to analyse properly. And so using artificial intelligence, we can analyse that much more precisely and get some very interesting ideas about what may happen. So we're looking a lot now in trying to predict the outcome of tumours by the radiographic patterns that you see on the CT scan. And that's proving very helpful. So that's the whole field of radiomics, which is really taking off now, trying to analyse the data scientifically, not just by eye, and that's helping us greatly.
So the machine that Paul was tinkering with or building, was it his idea? It moves with the body. So
Yes.
how's it?
So when you're looking at one option you can try to do, when you're looking at the way organs move during treatment, because the treatment lasts perhaps 30 seconds or 2 minutes, say. So you can try to deal with that motion by getting the patient to lie still, but that doesn't deal with their internal motion. They still need to breathe. Things like heartbeats obviously still occurring. You can try to control the breathing in the way we've already described by getting people to hold their breath for part or all of the treatment. But there are some things which you can't control, and one of those, particularly for prostate cancer, is the amount of gas in the bowel. One of the things that we don't realise that all the time we're sitting here, our bowel is sort of gurgling away, pushing gas up and down and past the rectum and past the prostate. And so if you actually take a movie loop with using X-rays or MRI during a treatment, you'll see the prostate and the rectum move quite significantly as the gas changes within the rectum. And so one of the things we're looking at is looking at ways of trying to track the movement of the prostate, either so you can turn the machine off, or even better, if you can follow the movement so that the X-ray field that you're using tracks the movement of the prostate or other internal organs like the liver and adjusts for their motion. Now you need to try to predict that adjustment so you're not always falling behind. The trick is to use the computer to try to keep ahead of what's happening. And that's where artificial intelligence becomes really important, just to analyse that data so you can move with the target. A bit like tracking planes with searchlights, but just in a more sophisticated way.
We can obviously see the benefits because you're locked onto the tumour and you're not moving and you're not hitting the healthy.
That's correct. Yeah. So the field changes as the tumour moves. The radiation field follows it. Ideally, very very quickly, so that you don't miss it at all.
How's it going?
It's going very well. It's still largely experimental. It's just coming into routine use in some areas, prostate in particular. If you put little metal markers into the prostate, you can track the movement of those metal markers quite easily. Obviously, what we'd like to be able to do is to do that without the metal markers, to be able to do that looking just at imaging of the prostate. Now, you can do that with MRI, and there are machines that combine treatment machines with MRI scanners, and there are a few of those around Australia, but they are very expensive and very difficult to maintain and run. So the progress, in my view, is going to come from doing the same thing with X-rays rather than MRI. But some people do think that MRI is the best way to do that. We just have to find better ways of making MRI scanners that are cheaper and easier to use and maintain.
Yeah. How much do they cost?
So a CT scanner costs around $500,000 or a little bit more.
What's that all?
MRI scanner probably 2 to 3 million. So it's a significant. And it's not just the cost difference; it's the running cost. MRIs are very expensive to run; need a lot of staff. They're quite hazardous things because of the magnetic field. You have to be very careful what metal objects taken into the room. And even outside the room, because you have to shield the walls with special shielding to keep the MRI field within the room, and to protect the scanner from external interference. So one of the issues here, for instance, here we're close to the tram line. It doesn't affect CT scanners, but could potentially affect MRI scanners if we put them very close to trams or underground trains or other large metal objects that are moving, can interfere with MRI scanners. So they're much more fussy technology than CT.
And that's the magnets.
Yes. And also they use liquid helium, which is a rare commodity these days. And
there's only one place on Earth or something where it leaks out, is it? In the States? Or?
Yes, I don't know. Yeah, I think there's only very, very small numbers. It's difficult to get. It's definitely becoming a sort of shortage commodity. And it's also quite dangerous because if the machine does heat up and the helium then boils off, it can displace the air in the room, and that's you can't live on helium, and so they have to have a special pipe called a quench pipe that takes any helium that might be produced to the outside. So that can be tricky if you're down in the basement. The companies are developing machines with a much smaller amount of helium that doesn't have that risk, but that's only just coming through onto the market at the moment. But they still need to be superconducting magnets, and so you're always going to have that problem of keeping them cool.
I'm not sure what else to ask you.
No.
Steve?
No, look, that was really all very clear.
Is it all good? But if you want me to run over anything else, because I sometimes slow my words a bit or sort of hesitate a bit at the wrong time. But
No, I mean, it's very straight ahead.
Andrew, anything you're interested in?
waking up,
No, I'm
it's thinking.
so interesting. No, I think I know more than I did before.
Yes, I mean sometimes one of the things that always worries me in these things is whether I've said it too simply or correctly. I don't want to mislead people. We're going to have a chance to look through and make sure that I haven't, said anything that's
Well, do you
misleading.
want to have another shot at a truncated version now?
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
And if you wanted to just sort of say too, like the amount of the radiation sources, like what the radiation actually is, like I said.
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
It's is it uranium-235 or cobalt? sort of,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Right.
Okay. Yep. So
Just
briefly,
practically.
just briefly. So just going back, it was really interesting that around the same time in the late 1800s, both radiation from radioactive materials and X-rays were discovered more or less at the same time. So the radioactive materials were people realised that there was this activity within the ores in the ground, and gradually learnt to separate them and get radium from the radioactive ores, which then had really interesting properties. X-rays were really developed as part of looking at the effect of accelerating electrons in vacuum tubes, making interesting scientific experiments. It was a bit of a serendipitous thing that X-rays were discovered. And once both of those were known, it soon became clear that as well as taking pictures, they also had effects on the human body, particularly fast-growing cells, and that's why they were used to treat cancer. So as technology improved just after the Second World War, there were two separate streams really. One was the cobalt machine, which was developed largely in Canada because they had a lot of nuclear reactors that produced cobalt, and so they realised they could use that, putting it into a metal case to make sure all the radiation came out in one direction. And cobalt-60 has a half-life of around 5 years or so, and so you could use this source for a long period of time as a method of treating patients, and that was higher energy than the diagnostic X-rays that were available at the time. But it had a lot of difficulties, including the need to have this large piece of cobalt sitting in your hospital. So the other form of technology was what are called linear accelerators, which really came out of the sort of wartime experience with radar and with nuclear weapons technology, where you could use microwaves as a sort of carrying thing, like a wave in a surfing wave, to accelerate electrons to very high energies, megavoltage energies, so millions of electron volts, and these could then hit a metal target and produce very high energy X-rays without the need to have a large radioactive source. And they have a higher energy than cobalt, and so they penetrate the body more effectively, and they're also much easier to collimate or shape the shape of the field. So within the end of the linear accelerator is a very large blocks of metal, either tungsten or some other very heavy metal, that moves in and out to shape the radiation field, because you can't usefully put shielding on the patient's body. The energy is too high. The shielding have to be unreasonably thick, and so that's all done in the head of the machine to make a very nice shape. And as the machine moves around the body, that shape of the field can change so that you can aim from different directions with different shaped fields.
4 or 5 directions at once?
Yes, well, one after the other. So yes, so initially it was done as a sort of stepwise thing where you'd aim in one direction, then you'd move around and do it in another direction. Now we use a technology called VMAT, which basically allows you to do that continuously. So the head of the machine rotates continuously around the patient, and the shape of the field also changes continuously so that you can treat the shape you want. Now this, of course, is impossible to do for the humans. It has to be done by computer, and that's where technology as the computers become faster, you can do much more complex treatment arrangements than we could before.
And that's the AI coming in too.
Yes, AI is helpful for that. Interesting too, a lot of the work actually comes from graphics cards originally designed for video games. They're actually very efficient ways of processing large amounts of data. So I think computing is not really my field, but they've adopted some of that technology, which wasn't used perhaps terribly usefully, to something much more useful now to help us plan the treatments much faster than we could before.
Good, are you happy with that? Do you think you want to compress it any further, or do an idiot's version, or?
Sorry, I think what we could. Depends what you think people really want to know, doesn't it?
I think they'll know bugger all, and anything they'll learn they'll carry with them.
Yeah.
Oh shit, is that how it works? Or
Yes.
is that what you... No, why are you doing it? Why is it effective?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you pointed out it burns but it doesn't burn. It's not quite a burn but it is a burn.
Yes, that's right.
And
I think the really key feature there is the DNA damage. That we think that most of the action of radiotherapy is through damaging DNA. It ionizes the DNA itself. It also ionizes the water molecules close to it, and that leads to breakage in DNA strands. And as you know, DNA has two strands, and if you break one strand, it doesn't make much difference because it very rapidly repairs itself from the other strand. It uses it as a copy to make the repair. If you break both strands, it's much harder to repair, although there are still many mechanisms for cells to do that. And the thing that makes the difference is that normal cells are very good at this, whereas cancer cells, because their DNA has already been altered by the cancer process, don't repair the damage as well. And so over time, by giving multiple treatments, we see a difference between the normal cells and the cancer cells.
I've lost the word for it. There's 46 chromosomes
Yes. Mm-hmm.
in the human body, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, 23 couple.
23 pairs, yes. Except for the X and Y chromosome, which are not paired in males.
And 48 in the great apes.
Possibly, I don't know. Trust you, honest man.
Have you looked into or heard about chromosome 2? Because we've been playing with and talking to people about CRISPR
Mm-hmm.
and editing of genes and chromosomes. And chromosome 2, which has been told to, or has been said that makes us human and separates us from the great apes, shows signs that it has been edited,
Uh-huh.
whether it's in 200,000 or 300,000 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Do you know anything about a process like that? Is that part of evolution?
I don't know. It's a very interesting point. I've only heard about it recently. It could obviously be a natural, I mean, the most likely surely has to be a natural process that something occurred that just changed that chromosome and it had some genetic advantage that allowed it to be carried forward more successfully than the other chromosome arrangement. I suppose one can imagine a sort of scenario like in 2001 where some external force is changing the chromosomes, but I suspect that's less likely.
Yeah, why would you?
Yes, that's right. Why would you? Apes are much easier to manage than people. Why would you?
Thanks a lot. You made me sentient and I didn't really want to be.
Yes, that's right. No, it's a fascinating concept. I mean, when I was growing up, looking at genetics being shortly after DNA was first sort of described, people would have thought it quite impossible to do the sort of alterations that we do now. But now we can do such amazing things, and I'm sure we could make such changes in other animals. Indeed, people are trying to reproduce species that have died out, trying to change the DNA of existing species back closer to those of, say, hairy mammoths or dodos or other creatures that have died out relatively recently. So technologically, I'm sure it would be perfectly possible to do that. It's just a question of who you think would do it and why.
Well, then you run into ethics.
Yes.
Yeah. I won't say anything about that.
No, we don't want to be recording that. But it is, I mean, I only heard it from you when you mentioned it a couple of days ago. But it's a fascinating idea that somebody could have, some green sort of gluggy monster could have landed down and found an ape and changed its DNA.
It could have been a meteor that upset everything. There's radiation coming in from all. Who the hell knows?
Yes.
I don't know how it happens.
No, I think that's actually a point that is worth perhaps thinking about, is just how much radiation we've evolved in, that we do live in quite a high radiation environment, from cosmic rays, from radiation from the Earth. So the addition of man-made radiation is not a new thing. People worry greatly that radiation is new and it'll cause terrible troubles. But in fact, for billions of years, our cells have evolved in an environment with a relatively high background radiation. And so they're very good at repairing radiation DNA damage.
Well, that's all to do with the magnetosphere too, isn't it?
Yes.
The solar winds are pushed away by
They are.
the magnetic
They are.
magnets and that as well.
Yes, magnets are very good. If it wasn't for that, we would have it in a very different environment. And the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere are also quite ionized and turn away a lot of charged particles that would make a big difference to us. And that's very important for, obviously, things like space exploration, where people are going to go out into a place where they're not protected by the Earth's magnetic field or the Earth's atmosphere. And we've certainly look at working with centres that are looking at the effect of that on astronauts, and it could be quite significant in terms of their cancer risk. Now, it's a risk most are probably willing to take for the excitement of being an astronaut, but obviously if we can minimise that risk, particularly during times of solar flares and other times when the radiation levels are very high, it is an active field of research as to how you might try to shield people from those rays at the critical times.
That's the mass corona. That what do they call it? MCGs. The Carrington event, 1856, and there was a big solar flare, but they refer to it as a a mass coronal explosion or something.
Something, yes, it comes from the sun's corona, doesn't it? But it's really it's interesting. There's been
So the sun burps.
Yes.
If it burps at you,
yes,
you're covered. And it's like, wow.
Wow.
And that's what happened with the Carrington event.
uh,
Where,
It's like some sort of singularity, is it?
well, all the telegraphs in North America melted.
oh, really?
They just, all the electricity came through the atmosphere. All the telegraphs went offline. Nobody was hurt per se, but it was all this electricity was everywhere. That was okay in 1956.
Tricky now, yes.
If it hits now, it's going to fry every electronic grid in the world. It's going to,
Computers go with it, yeah.
computers, cars, anything that's got wire, it's going to enter. So it's like, wow. And that's not a question of if, that's a question of when.
Yes, it's bound to happen
Yeah.
again. Isn't it? If it's happened before, it'll.
And it'll knock every satellite out too.
Yes, no, it's interesting.
Yeah.
No,
No,
because
yeah, look up the Carrington event.
okay, I will
because
because I've learned a lot from talking to you. I've learned a lot about
I read about it 20 years ago and said, no one had heard
Yeah,
about
because
it.
I mean, one of the things, the problem is these cosmic rays are extremely high energy, and so shielding them with things like lead is very, very difficult because you just need such an enormous weight to do that. And so in spaceships, it's just not possible to carry enough weight to effectively do that. They've looked at things like hiding behind the water tanks and things just to try to reduce all sorts of ideas like that if you know it's coming. Obviously, the other thing is radiation protecting drugs that you can give the astronauts to make them better at combating the effects of radiation.
Well, and long term, we should be able to see from the survivors of the space station.
Yes.
They're not there for quite some time.
It's likely that the effect will be relatively mild, that the proportion of patients who get cancer is not going to be that much higher than normal because up to a third of people will actually die of cancer anyway. And so a small change probably doesn't really matter so much, but well, except to the individuals. But
Well, yeah, as people have said, the cancer's a disease of the elderly. It's
Yeah, it
like
is
it
generally,
hasn't
yeah.
always killed a third of 1 in 3 because that 1 in 3 died of something else
That's
before
right.
they got cancer.
That's an important point for people to understand.
Could
that-
you make that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the things that people worry about is that we're seeing more cancer these days than we used to, and people worry that that's due to changes in the environment or in our lifestyle in some way. Now, it's possible that that's partly true, particularly in bowel cancer in young people, but for the majority of cancers, they occur as one gets older. And so they're relatively uncommon before the age of 50. And then as you get older, that incidence of cancer rises quite substantially. So as the population lives longer, as we don't die of so much of heart disease or violence or other things, then we're likely to see more cancers just because of the aging population. So for most cancers, the incidence of cancer at a particular age is actually falling rather than rising. So it's not as bad as people sometimes think.
That's a good note to finish on, I think.
Yeah, it's positive. No, it's true, actually. It's true.
Steve?
Could I just say, what was great was when you were talking about the vulnerability of cancer cells because they're mutants and they're not as hardy as real cells. And the effects of radiation means that they are likely to be more vulnerable.
Yes.
Simplify that.
Yeah, just as in a short
Short.
statement. That's
Yes. Okay. I have to think of the best way to phrase that.
Just going to reframe this now.
Well, I'm supposed to look at you.
Yeah.
Looking the wrong way. Don't look at the camera. Look at you. Okay, I was ready. Yes. One of the questions patients often ask is, if you're giving radiotherapy to the body, how do you know you're killing the cancer cells and you're not killing the normal cells? Now, that's a really logical question, and we are indeed killing many of the normal cells, but there are at least two reasons why that's not as bad as it sounds. One is that cancer cells, because of their already damaged DNA, don't repair DNA damage as well as normal cells. And normal cells are very good at repairing DNA damage, and as long as we don't give too much each time, they repair most, if not all, of that damage. The other thing is that we're only treating part of the body, and so cells can move in from other parts of the body. So blood cells, for instance, can circulate into the area that we've treated. Skin cells can grow into the area. Other cells migrate through the body, and so the body can call upon reserves in areas that have not been irradiated to do the repairing, whereas the cancer doesn't have that option, and so that's why you see a differential effect, killing more of the cancer than we do the normal tissues.
Shorter than that?
Okay, right, start again. It's too long, isn't it? Yes. Okay, one of the questions people often ask is, if you're treating part of the body, why is it that the cancer cells die and the normal cells don't? Now, that's the outcome that we want, and that's because the cancer cells don't repair the damage that the radiation causes as effectively as normal cells. And also normal cells from the rest of the body can move into the treated area to help repair the damage that's been caused.
They take over.
Yes.
They climb back in.
And there's actually a lot of interesting work, I mean, not for this talk really, but on cells that do migrate through the body and then settle. So it's not just blood cells, it's actually what we call mesenchymal cells, mesenchymal cells that will actually migrate through the body and then land and then repair the tissue in the place that they land in. And so,
Were we talking about that the other day, or was it somebody else? I can't-
don't think so. I think it's not a field I know much about, but it's interestingly becoming increased. The ability of stem cells to migrate through the body from one area and land in other parts of the body and fix the damage. A bit like if there's an earthquake, that people rush in and bring things with them and fix the broken buildings in a way that you couldn't do if your whole town was destroyed. You have to have a resource that's not been damaged that can bring in the components you need to fix the damage.
I think it was Bush Galaheba brought it up. We couldn't CAR T cells and other cells that just zip through the bodies at
Yes.
certain.
Yeah, I think we're realising now there's a lot more movement than we realised before, but around the body. Cells move into the bloodstream and out of the bloodstream again.
Okay. I think that's enough. We've got to get you waving in front of a machine.
Fair enough, I'm better at waving.
We could say that.
I think so.